Everyone, back again. Took a couple of days away. Obviously, last week I dropped a live on Instagram. If you didn't see, but if, as always, if you're listening to this live, reply in comments. If you're in the Facebook group, reply in the comments. I will answer you. I will do videos for your questions. I will keep the wheels moving. But as always, dressing gown, coffee. We're in business. So today, what I want to do is I want to talk to you about some of the key metrics that you need to understand when developing sprint performance. And we'll probably just start looking at acceleration in the beginning. And on a side note, excuse that I'm missing a part of my tooth. My cap fell off last week when I banged my head and bit my teeth. So not great. But that's all part of it. So we're going to look at some of the acceleration metrics that we need to start to understand, and we can look at some of the deeper variables, but then also some of the actual real world applications that you're going to need to start to understand when you're coaching, like real applied stuff. So let's start off with let's revisit acceleration. So founded in, obviously Newton's first law is overcoming inertia, which blends into that second law of force equals mass times acceleration. So acceleration equals force times mass, and that is what we're looking at. And so to start off with, when we're focusing on our acceleration phase of any movement, whether that becoming upright acceleration, let's get the whiteboard out, whether that's upright acceleration or from receiver stance or from 2-point or from 3-point. So what we're trying to do is take our center of mass, and we have to do this independently of leg diagrams and all that sort of stuff, because this is what it all boils down to. We take our center of mass, displacement off the ground, relative to the start position, and we want to put force through it to accelerate our hips, a center of mass, in a positive trajectory to where we want to go. So that's the first metric that we're looking for, is displacement. How much displacement can we create? And I'm going to draw you a really simple diagram here that we can use to relate to this. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So when we're looking at displacement over the course of a run, and we've talked about the varying difference of acceleration curves. So over a distance of 50 meters, we've got super short taper off, we've got a medium, and we've got our long acceleration curves. Okay, so always pay respect to that, but the rules stay the same. All we have to do is elongate out our drive phase of the work that we're doing. And how does that apply in team sports? Well, it's really, really simple. You can elongate out your drive on an acceleration when you've got that pre-planned distance to occur. Kick chase is an elongated acceleration curve. And also, as a play is building towards you, in football, you've got corner flagging as well in soccer, and in you've got arc runs around the side, and in American football, you've got your longer acceleration curves. You've got flies, you've got corners, you've just got all vertical seams, ways in which you will be gradually building your acceleration. So the thing that I'm going to talk to you about today is, and the key metric that we're going to look at, is that displacement. So if we run just a straight line that represents the ground, as straight as possible, that represents the ground, our displacement, okay, and this is over a given distance. This is just our relationship between acceleration to max velocity. So our displacement okay, in initial acceleration is going to be here. Okay, what happens by that time, once we have that acceleration, once we get the hip clearance. So one of the things that we always see is that people will project, but not project well enough, which then causes our, the swing leg to come through and strike vertically. Okay, so then the foot ends up, this is an elaborate diagram. So then the foot ends up in front of the center of mass, which then you think the quad and you think everything and the hips, what they have to do is pull that foot over, rather than if we have optimal projection here, then the quad and the hip will push the hip through to generate acceleration. And that's a really, really key point to understand. So now when we're looking at that displacement, what we generate here is space and time. If we're working through optimally here, we allow space and time for our hips to rise. Okay, so everyone, if you dig into the weeds, the relationship between horizontal and vertical force, it's been argued over and over again, but for me, it doesn't really matter, because what I'm trying to do is understand the end result. Okay, we can work on the ends of extremes. Early acceleration, you're going forward. Your primary resource is to go forward. Max velocity is propulsion. Acceleration happens on the ground. Maximum velocity happens over the ground. Really, really simple way to understand it. So as we go through through our steps, and this could be steps 0 to 5 or 0 to 20. Okay, the relationship when we're trying to put this horizontal displacement on is to buy time for this shin angle to slowly start to increase, and with that, what we're trying to do is slowly take this maximal horizontal projection and turn that into maximum vertical displacement. That is what you're trying to do. I'll say it again: maximum horizontal displacement. We're trying to convert that into maximum vertical displacement at the right time. So when you think of it from that way, what we're trying to do is take this forward orientation, and as we are coming through the reps, so I'm projecting hard, is literally doing this with it. Is exactly the way that we see with the shin angle. Okay, that's a bit more acute than we wanted. However, the relationship is still the same. That's what we're trying to achieve, because if you can climb through your gears, we're climbing up this mountain of sprint, and we're trying to get to that 100%, that max velocity. If you're climbing up through your gears well, then what that's going to do is set up this distance well enough so we can still create time and space for our thigh to come through here when we're in stance, and then step through and then flip the relationship so we can propel off the ground and we can meet our backside demands. My stick diagrams are not the best today. To then re-establish ground contact. So that's one of the key metrics that you need to understand, and relationships that you can readily apply straight away as a coach. And that's really, really important. So when you're starting to teach acceleration and coach acceleration, start thinking about, well, if they're struggling to find top gears later down in your acceleration curve, what's happening in this first few steps? What is not being seen? What is not? Are we stuck in transition? People talk about squatty running and stuff. Do we get stuck there? And people do get stuck there, and which is why, yeah, don't get me started. So when we're looking at that That's what you need to be understanding. So, and the next KPI that I just want you to start to think about in early acceleration is ground contact time. Okay. Really, really simple, really, really easy to understand. All right. We've got our relationships. Okay. Long to short. Okay. So first and foremost, we need to establish with our athletes, what is the rate of change in ground contact time? What is the rate of change in the ground contact time? Ignore what it should be to start off with. But if you can profile off a 10 meter, for example, what is ground contact 1 and what is ground contact 7? Because 7 steps is usually 10 meters. Are we seeing a gradual decrease in contact time, or are we seeing something like that? Okay. Because first and foremost, what you want to do when you're establishing, because a lot of the people that we're working with are novice sprinters anyway, so this is going to be highly variable. And when we talk about on the mentorship group, we're talking about Bernstein-Hammer's study, is we're trying to minimize that bandwidth and that variability between path of movement and also execution on task. So when we're looking here, you want to see what that initial ground contact time is. Once, say if it's 0.3 for step 1, and then you've got a 0.1 for step 2, for argument's sake, that relationship is wrong. Okay, because the reason why we go back to the physics and the relationship is that the compensatory mechanism from having a longer ground contact time here is going to be a shorter ground contact time here. And so what we need to do is then rebalance this relationship. And this is why working off statics is really important, because in terms of our hierarchy of order of physical preparation, we're looking at special developmental and special preparatory exercises that are regime specific, that fulfill dynamic correspondence and specificity of what we need to do. So when an initial ground contact time is really long, it is lacking in the specificity. So that's why we will always go back and review our wall drills and our prowler work and everything to allow us to help manage that ground contact time. So when you're looking at here, again, let's go back. We're trying to understand the relationship between ground contact time from step 1 to step 7. People talk about, the use of drive index. And it's the ratio between stride length and ground contact time, which is great. However, not everyone has the time or the tools to be able to do that. And I'm a big believer of, like, if you can do this on a rest period, then you're winning. And the easiest way to do that is get a slow motion app that has a timer on it, and then literally just calculate that first step ground contact time. And if from upright 2-point acceleration, if you're in that 0.2, if you're somewhere in that 0.2, then you're good to go. Okay, finding that 0.2 off static into step 1, then you can start really building. Because we want to get, if you've got GPS, right? Here's a little test that you can do. You do a 30 to 40 meter sprint, clip the max V off of that 30 to 40 sprint, then do the slow motion and look at the ground contact times at max V. If that is not a 0.1, then you know that we've got work to do. So there's no point in terms of your decision making, because this is where people is like, oh, I've got a max velocity of this. Well, yeah, but you're still slow on the ground. And so one of the biggest things is developing and working off that slow, the speed off the ground and that ground contact time. So therein lies some really important metrics that I'm going to can and will expand on. But what I want you to do is start thinking about that. Ask me some questions and let's get after it, because this stuff is really, really important. And if you want to learn more about it, I go much more and heavily in depth in my certification on how we actually as coaches get out in the real world and start doing all this stuff properly. So for now, if you're on the YouTube, hit like. If you're on the podcast, just enjoy it. If you're on Facebook, drop me a question. Engage in this stuff. If you're seeing the clip back on Instagram, then just get involved and share the love. I appreciate all of you and I'll speak to you soon.